So guys, as we've been talking with Alan Jacobs this week about technology, we've been introduced to this distinction between tools and machines, where a tool is the kind of thing that extends my ability to do something. We've heard about the example of a man with a cane, where the cane doesn't take the place of his action, but it extends his ability to act. But a machine does the work for me. Is a smartphone a tool or machine? What do you think?
I think it's probably meant to be a tool, but I'm afraid that it's becoming more and more of a machine.
Okay.
So that's how I would say that. What would you say?
I would say it probably depends on the app. So I would distinguish between what's loaded on the phone and what is the hardware of the phone. So I think when it comes to communication technology, internet technology in general, but I think looking at things in terms of hardware versus software is an important distinction to make. So as hardware, the smartphone is a great tool because at the end of the day, it's still a phone. It's still allowing you to communicate over long distances, and functionally, that's what it is. Once you start adding apps to it, it becomes a holder of software, and that software can become machines because it's based on algorithms. So we're looking at things like a Google Map app. Now you lose all sense of direction because you're running a route. You add social media. Now you're leaving it up to the search algorithm of your newsfeed to determine what news is relevant to you instead of you going out and finding it. At that point, it becomes a machine. It's doing your thinking for you. You're not learning anything.
Are all apps, do they all sort of render my smartphone into a machine for me?
It seems like some apps could be tools and some apps could be machines, I suppose, or maybe even in the different ways that we use them, they could be one or the other, like a mapping app.
Yeah.
If we use it as a tool to help us figure out how to get places and then use it as a guide, but I think a lot of people have used the mapping apps as a machine. The only way they know to get someplace is to follow the machine that tells them where.
Oh, interesting.
I'm reading an interesting book called The Lost Art of Finding Our Way that talks about this type of stuff, about how, did you know that people used to be able to get around in the middle of the ocean outside of the site of any land by just knowing the pattern of the waves and the wind and that kind of thing. So the people who traveled between islands, 1,000 years ago.
I remember I took a trip driving from Nashville to Washington, D.C. a few years ago. It was before I had a smartphone, and it took about 3 days and just kind of went like this. I went to get Thomas Guides from Long Beach, and so I had a flip phone and Thomas Guides, and one night I was staying way out in the sticks in Kentucky in a B&B, but my phone was dying, and all I had was Thomas Guides, and this was way out in the sticks, and I remember this sort of was it a thrill? I mean, I was a little scared. Or another night in the North Carolina mountains where I was going to stay in an empty house, and it was a dark back road. And I mean, there's a real sense of, I didn't have the kind of smartphone where I had a bunch of numbers I could call, where I had all sorts of ways to figure out where I am or to get help if I needed help. I remember the sense of vulnerability that I just don't have with my smartphone. In one sense, my smartphone enables me to do things, including reaching out for help, which requires my agency. And I wonder what's going on with that.
I want to kind of comment, maybe offer a flip side to that idea of vulnerability, because I think with certain mapping apps, let's just stick with the mapping app for now. With certain mapping apps, it's almost funny how even if it's functioning fully, it can still bring you to that point of vulnerability, I would suppose. So, for example, let's say you use an app like, what is that, the one you like to use, Waze?
Waze.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, great app, right? It kind of gets you around the traffic and everything like that. But it's only looking at the point of getting you from point A to point B. Now, let's complete the picture. You're trying to go from point A to point B. That's what the app is doing. It becomes the machine by which you do it, because it's going to take you through whatever route to get you there the fastest. But what happens when that route goes through environments and areas that you are completely unfamiliar with, that may not necessarily be safe environments, that doesn't take into account like any needs you might have at the time you're driving through that particular geography. So I would probably suggest that sense of vulnerability you might have felt as your phone was dying, even though you had hard copy maps, could be an almost artificial sense of vulnerability that we've begun to attach to our phones, probably to too much of a degree, because even when we rely on apps, I would say relying on that app, in this case a mapping app, absent our sense of direction. We're kind of outsourcing our decision-making processes. We're outsourcing our ability to be aware of our immediate environment and our surroundings, the time of day. It's our immediate needs, the needs of our vehicle,
Or
and
the
party.
needs of the neighborhood we're driving through.
Exactly.
It's the opposite too.
Yeah,
that some
that too,
neighborhoods are now like overrun by wazers who
absolutely.
go through these small little roads when they
Right,
should stick
right.
to the big roads.
Right, and what does that do to a local community? We can keep going, but I mean, I think there is that sense in which we do more than just outsource our directionality or our ability to find direction to an app. We're now, in some ways, even as we're using it and feeling safer for using it, we actually are moving to a point where we're actually exposing ourselves to greater risks simply because we are using an app absent of our environment or any environmental awareness that we're building. And so we're making ourselves more vulnerable, but as you pointed out, we can also be posing a risk to those around us, mostly because we're just unaware of one another and we can end up colliding.
Yeah, I think that's a good example of something becoming a machine.
Yeah.
What about social media? Now, we've been learning in this seminar how talking about social media is a little bit overly broad and we should look at specifics because
That's a great
Facebook is
way of
different than
putting it,
Snapchat is different than whatever the new thing is.
Yeah.
But what about, for example, Snapchat? Is that a machine or a tool? Or what about Facebook? You want to talk about either one of those? I don't know if we can. We're not very savvy
don't
with
have
either
it.
of
How
these.
many times do you
Snapchat.
snap? Let's be honest.
0.
I've
And
probably
I like to
sent
keep it that way.
5 in the past 3 months.
Okay, so yeah, maybe we shouldn't talk
Maybe
about
we should
Snapchat.
talk about
What do we
Snapchat.
use? What do we use in common here? I use Instagram and Twitter.
I use Instagram and Facebook, but not very much.
I do Twitter and Facebook, LinkedIn a little bit.
Okay, so we've got
So that's
two-way.
kind of
We'll pick one. Let's pick one.
yeah.
Instagram is easy.
Okay, so Instagram is
I've had some
tool
experience
versus
with
machine.
Instagram. So
Yeah. So it's a machine in that it does all the picture taking for us. It does all of the and picture editing.
and sharing.
Yeah, but in one sense, it's a tool in that I use it to share. I mean, to get back to that, I use it to present myself, to give a visual presentation of something that's going on. Often in real time, not always, because sometimes
Right.
people are doing throwback Thursdays or they're doing baby pictures or something like that.
Yeah.